Simply put, Bitcoin carries no third-party risk. I'm not talking about its price here. I mean its resilience. Only Bitcoin is free from third-party risk. By third-party risk, I mean this. It's when your asset depends on someone else's effort, their honesty, or their competence to retain its value. Of course, that's the ideal, but it's not an empty statement. So, when you look at Bitcoin, it's the kind of asset for people who don't want to rely. Of course, Bitcoin has many features, but its most important one is you don't have to trust a third party. From what I've seen of people who call themselves libertarians, they ultimately still trust the state. They trust the nation-state itself. In Korea, that means trusting the Korean government, not a specific party in power, but the system of Korea as a nation. Let me give you an example. Take the Itaewon tragedy. When a disaster happens and there's no clear person to hold accountable, we still end up believing the government is the one responsible. That could mean government officials or an agency. Neither the ruling party, nor the opposition, nor the media ever questions this assumption. It's deeply embedded in how we think. So deep, in fact, that we're not even aware of it. I'm not here to judge whether that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's what I've observed. In other words, I've never met someone who truly sees this world as the wild in the libertarian sense, honestly. If you really thought the world was the wild, you'd be doing things like this. If North Korea had a nuke, you'd have gas masks, a month's worth of emergency food, and bottled water stored at home. And you'd keep rotating them. Some people do, actually. But even they forget about it when the crisis passes. I'm not pointing fingers, I'm talking about myself. I lean a bit toward that mindset. Sometimes I stock up on rice and water, and my family teases me for it. But in the US, they really exist. People who are libertarians in the truest sense. American libertarians carry firearms, and they buy bunkers stocked to last months in case of emergencies. In Korea, that's hard to do. They truly believe the world is, at its core, the wild. That's why trusting something like FTX is a huge contradiction, because they claim they don't trust the nation-state, yet they rely on something built by people trying to escape it, leaving themselves fully exposed to someone else's honesty, skill, and circumstances. If I start defending Bitcoin right now, you might think it's totally out of place, because you're probably thinking, isn't there a scandal going on with Bitcoin? And yes, that's true. We can expect these things to keep blowing up from time to time, but right now it's a dogfight. For people like me, when things like this happen, it means going all in for a fight, literally for survival. It becomes a brutal battle, and it's not easy. That's why people who don't share the philosophy can't endure it. Without conviction, you'll give up fast. I've probably been in one or two of these dogfights myself. If you're curious what I mean by dogfight, watch a film called Bullethead. It's a masterpiece. It doesn't show anything graphically horrifying, but it makes you imagine things that are. So the elderly, those in fragile health, and pregnant women should be cautious, but it's worth watching. It's a hidden gem with some truly great actors. That's the kind of dogfight I'm talking about. That's the fight we have to engage in. If you're going to fight, you really have to fight. If it's a dogfight, then commit to it. You can't go into it with a picnic mindset. In fact, if you're a real Bitcoiner, you don't trust exchanges. That's why Bitcoiners have that same mindset. I mentioned earlier, like carrying firearms and storing 3 months' worth of food in an underground bunker. Bitcoin is an asset for people with that kind of mentality. People who truly believe the nation-state is incapable. They also believe that the elites running the state talk sense in normal times, but lie at every critical moment. Take the bank runs at the exchange we're seeing now, or the moral hazard in bailing people out. And then Luna, that's where a lot of this started. Is any of this unfamiliar? It's nothing new. We've seen this kind of thing every decade, whenever financial crises hit different countries. It's the same scene bankers and elites have staged time and again. Of course, when such crises occur, the state steps in, jails some, rescues others, but some are left to die. Like in the Busan Savings Bank case, they couldn't save it. So even when the government intervenes, its focus is more on containing the contagion than helping victims. It's about stopping the infection before it spreads through the whole system. And once the media goes quiet about the victims, we act as if they never existed. But in those legacy finance crises, real direct victims, those who lost jobs, savings, or investments, are stories we never hear. But when it happens in the crypto world, the media feels free to report on it because it's not legacy. Even if they just report the facts without exaggeration, they treat it far less fairly than they do with legacy finance scandals. Bitcoin is an asset for people who trust neither the nation state nor even Michael Saylor, despite his massive Bitcoin holdings. That's why you hear things like this. If Michael Saylor's company collapses because its assets crash, it'll trigger a massive hurricane. The media frames it as near collapse. I hope that doesn't happen, but Bitcoin is designed to survive even that extreme scenario. Because Saylor got into Bitcoin because he liked it, Bitcoin never needed Michael Saylor. That point is crucial. Bitcoin belongs to those who place no expectations on any third party, and it's an asset that's been tempered and strengthened through dogfights like this. So Bitcoin is no stranger to the kind of brutal fight you see in Bullet Head. At some point, Bitcoiners may have gotten rich, put on tuxedos, mingled with Wall Street folks, and dined in fancy hotels, but that fighting spirit never disappeared. Now it's resurfacing, and for a while, this fight is unavoidable. Too many people have been let down. Regaining that trust will be very hard, unless a miracle happens, and by miracle I mean something like this. Vitalik and other big names in the industry coming together, putting up their own assets as collateral to save FTX, and pulling off collective action that legacy finance has never shown. It would be amazing, but I don't think it'll happen, because everyone's too focused on saving their own ecosystem. That's the prisoner's dilemma. And that's ultimately why the state becomes necessary. The reason even oppressive states gain legitimacy is because voluntary cooperation so often fails. That's why we end up with authorities using force to compel cooperation. Libertarians are the ones who hate that. And Bitcoin was created by people who reject and distrust it. So inside Bitcoin is a philosophy of relying on no one. And nothing about Bitcoin's nature or core properties has changed. If anything has changed, it's that some investors, whether in Bitcoin or crypto, were subconsciously trusting someone. And trust no one as a principle. It's easy to nod along when you hear it, but it's one of the hardest truths to internalize. Why? Because we're so used to trusting someone. And because it's such a hard principle to embrace, this very moment becomes the test, whether you truly trust third parties or not. That gets revealed starting now. This fight will prove whether you're a real Bitcoiner. If you can't stomach this fight, it's better to leave. And if you leave, don't come back, because Bitcoin's nature isn't going to change. This rebellious philosophy, this rejection of the nation-state itself will not change. Sure, the price might rise if the legacy players pour in their money, but even then, the true spirit of Bitcoin isn't about tuxedos and hotel parties. Bitcoin is, at its core, about fighting through dogfights like this. I hope you keep that in mind.